There's a particular kind of man who rides into trouble on purpose. Not because he's brave. Not exactly. Brave men weigh the odds and move forward anyway. This kind of man, the kind I'm talking about, doesn't weigh anything. He just goes. He goes because standing still feels like drowning, and moving toward someone else's pain is the only way he knows to keep his own at a distance. I've seen that kind of man before. Seen them in saloons, in cavalry lines, in trading posts at the edge of nowhere. Men with a story they're running from, wearing someone else's crisis like a coat they borrowed and forgot to return. Cole Hargrove was exactly that kind of man. I know because I watched him ride into the Mescalero foothills on a Tuesday morning in late October of 1887 with nothing but a canteen, a bedroll, a Winchester he'd never once fired at a person, and a grief so heavy it had bent him forward in the saddle like a man carrying water uphill. He told me later he went looking for the missing. What he found instead was a woman who didn't need saving at all. What he needed, well, that took him a good while longer to admit. But I was there, I saw it, and if you give me the time, I'll tell you how it happened, how a man who spent 3 years running from himself finally stopped. My name is Everett Prout, and I keep a logbook. I started doing it in the winter of 1879, after I nearly died of exposure on the Llano Estacado and spent 4 days thinking about everything I should have written down and hadn't. I'm not a sentimental man, ask my sister. She'll tell you I have the emotional range of a fence post. But I do believe in documentation. I believe that things happen, and if nobody writes them down, they become rumors, and rumors become legends, and legends are almost always wrong in every direction that matters. So I write things down. I was working as a supply contractor out of Fort Stanton in the autumn of '87, running provisions and dry goods between the fort and the small settlements that had sprung up like stubborn weeds along the Rio Hondo Valley. It was not glamorous work. It smelled primarily of mule and dried beans, and the most dramatic thing that typically happened was a wheel breaking on a creek crossing. But it paid, and it kept me moving, and moving was something I understood. That's how I first saw Cole Hargrove at the Baca Creek crossing, on a Tuesday morning that had started cold and was threatening to go worse. He was already off his horse when I came around the bend, a sorrel gelding, well kept, the kind of animal that tells you something about the man who cares for it. Cole was crouched at the edge of the water, refilling his canteen, and from behind you'd have said he was 35, maybe 40. Trail lean, shoulders wide, the kind of stillness in his body that comes from years of outdoor work. He wore a plain canvas duster, brown, and a hat that had been quality once, but had since been rained on so many times it had developed a character of its own. When he turned around and I saw his face, I revised my estimate. He was maybe 32, but his eyes were older. That's the only way I know to put it. Some men carry their years in their faces. Cole Hargrove carried his in his eyes, in the way they moved across a landscape and found nothing worth landing on, like a hawk that had been hunting so long it had forgotten what hunger actually felt like. "Morning," I said, pulling my team to a halt. "Morning," he stood, capped the canteen, slung it over his saddle horn. "You coming from Stanton?" "Going toward it, I'm Prout, supply run." He nodded. That kind of nod that doesn't give anything away. "You know the Mescalero country up toward the Sacramentos?" he asked. Now that was a question with 100 different answers depending on who was asking and why. I studied him for a moment. He wasn't military, wrong posture, too much give in the knees. He wasn't a bounty man, no irons, no warrants folder in his saddlebag as far as I could tell. He had the look of a man with a task, but not a violent one. "I know some of it," I said. "What's your business up that way?" He hesitated. Not a guilty hesitation, more like a man deciding how much of a story is actually relevant to a stranger. "Family reported a woman missing," he said finally. "Gone 3 weeks, settlement family over near Chilarosa. Their daughter went out to gather. She does it regular, apparently, collects plants for medicine making, and didn't come back. Her father's been sick, couldn't go himself. Brothers are working the harvest. Nobody's looked hard enough yet." I waited. "Her name's Nara Swiftwater," he added, and something in the way he said it, carefully like a word he'd practiced, told me she wasn't just a name to him already. "Half Apache, half Mexican, 26. The family says she knows the hills well, but 3 weeks is a long time." "It is," I agreed. I told them I'd look. You a lawman? No. Friend of the family. Another pause. I passed through Chilarosa 2 months back, stopped at their place for water. Her father's a good man. I told him if he ever needed anything, he stopped. Shook his head slightly. It was just something you say, and then you have to decide whether you meant it. I had written down in my logbook exactly 112 things I'd observed about human beings up to that point. That morning at Baca Creek, I added number 113. Some men make promises to fill silence. Some men make promises because silence terrifies them. The second kind always shows up. I told him the route I knew. 3, maybe 4 ridgelands east-northeast, where the pinon gave way to juniper scrub and the old mescalero trails cut through the limestone. It was country I'd crossed twice in good weather. In late October, with the temperatures dropping at altitude, it was different country entirely. He thanked me with another one of those closed nods, mounted up and rode east. I watched him go for longer than I should have. There was something about the set of his shoulders, not proud, not defeated, just aimed, like a man who had decided on a direction and was going to hold it until something physical stopped him. I made a note of it in my logbook and went about my business. It was 6 days before I saw him again. In the meantime, I'd completed my run to the fort, resupplied, taken on a new contract, and was heading back through the valley when word came through the settlement at Ruidoso that a man and a woman had come down out of the Sacramentos, came into Enrique Delgado's trading post at the edge of the hills, both of them trail-worn and quiet, and had asked for water and left money on the counter before Enrique could even get a good look at them. Old Enrique was nearly 80 and had been living on the edge of that country since before New Mexico was a territory. He'd seen Apache and Mexicans and cavalry and settlers and every combination thereof, and he didn't rattle easily. But he told his nephew, and his nephew told a freighter named Ospey, and Ospey was sitting at the same fire as me outside Ruidoso when he repeated it. Enrique says the woman was Apache, well, part younger, said she moved like someone who'd been through something and decided to be fine about it. Ospey turned his coffee cup in his hands. And the man, tall fella, canvas duster, Enrique said he sat across from her at the counter and kept real still, not hovering, not talking much, just present, like he was there in case she needed something but wasn't going to announce it. That how Enrique put it? Someone asked. More or less, you know Enrique doesn't waste words. I wrote it down. Present, not hovering, in case she needed something without announcing it. That's a specific kind of care. The kind that takes practice or grief or both. The second time I saw Cole Hargrove, it was at the edge of Chilarosa, outside a small adobe house set back from the main road behind a fence made of ocotillo stalks. Late afternoon, the light going amber and horizontal. I'd stopped to water my mules at the community trough, and I recognized the sorrel gelding tied to the ocotillo post immediately. I sat there for a while. I'm not a man who intrudes, and I had no real reason to stop. But the logbook was open on the seat beside me, and I had a deep and inconvenient habit of needing to know how things turned out. I climbed down, knocked on the gate post, which was the custom. A man came to the door, older, moving carefully, the kind of careful that comes from pain rather than age. Dark eyes, a face that had been handsome once and was now something better, weathered into a kind of dignity. He looked at me with the assessment that men who have lived hard lives apply to strangers, quick, thorough, concluding. I'm Prout, I said. I met Cole Hargrove at Baca Creek 6 days ago. I pointed him your way toward the Sacramentos. I was passing through and wanted to know if. Come in, the man said. His name was Domingo Swiftwater. He walked slowly to a chair and lowered himself into it with a controlled grimace that I recognized as the practiced dignity of a man who refuses to perform his suffering for an audience. There was a woman in the back of the room moving around a cook stove. Young, her back was to me. Cole was sitting at the table. He looked up when I entered, and there was a flicker of something, surprise, maybe, or the kind of recognition you feel for someone who witnessed a moment you'd half forgotten. Prout, he said. Found her, I said, because it seemed like the thing to confirm. Found her. He said it plainly, and I noticed he didn't say rescued or saved, just found. Sit, Domingo said. There is coffee. I sat. Cole had his hands around a cup, and he was looking at the table in that particular way of men who are thinking about something they can't quite organize into words. He looked different from the man I'd seen at the creek, Or rather, he looked like the same man with something loosened. Not relaxed, loosened, like a knot that had been pulled so tight for so long that one strand had finally given. "How was it up there?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Cold," he said, "and complicated." From the back of the room, without turning around, he got lost on the second day. I looked toward the woman at the cook stove. She still had her back to me, stirring something that smelled like dried chili and venison. "I wasn't lost," Cole said, with the patience of a man who has already had this argument and lost it. "I knew the general direction. You were walking in a circle. A large circle. A circle." Domingo was watching this exchange with an expression I recognized after a moment as suppressed satisfaction. The kind a father wears when he sees something working out in a way he approves of but knows better than to comment on. The woman turned around, finally. Nara Swiftwater was, I wrote this in my logbook later, trying to be accurate and finding accuracy insufficient. She was the kind of person who makes you recalibrate the room the moment you see their face. Not because of conventional beauty, though she had that in a severe and particular way. Dark eyes, sharp jaw, high cheekbones that her Apache grandmother had apparently handed down like an heirloom. But it was more the quality of her attention. She looked at you the way a hawk looks at open ground, completely, without pretense, as though she had already decided what you were and was simply waiting to see if you'd confirm it. She looked at me for exactly 2 seconds, then she looked at Cole. Something passed between them, not a look you could describe easily, not tender exactly, not romantic in any legible way. More like a frequency, like two instruments that had found a shared note by accident and were both still vibrating with it. She turned back to the cook stove. I drank my coffee and didn't write anything down for a while, because some things take time to understand. Later, while Domingo slept and Nara was outside bringing in wood, Cole and I sat at the table and he talked. Not a lot, he wasn't built for a lot, but enough. He'd been born in Uvalde County, Texas. Ranching family, 5 kids, the loud kind of childhood that prepares you to survive but not particularly to feel. He'd left at 18, drifted north and west, done a season of trail driving up to Kansas, 2 years of ranch work in Colorado, and then in the winter of 1883 he'd landed in a small town in the Arizona Territory and met a woman named Clara. He said her name once, then he didn't say it again. I didn't ask. Some stories have doors you learn not to open by the way a man's breathing changes near them. What I understood, she was gone, 3 years gone. And he had spent those 3 years doing exactly what I'd first identified in him, moving toward other people's problems, because it was the only direction that didn't lead back to his own. "You do this a lot?" I asked. "Volunteer for things?" He thought about it. "I've helped some here and there, mostly it doesn't amount to much." He turned his cup in a slow circle. "Family's wagon broke down, I fixed it. Water dispute at a ranch, I talked it through. Kid was stuck in a mine shaft outside Magdalena last year, I went in after him." He paused. "He was fine, I was more scared than he was." "But you went. Someone had to. And you happened to be there." "I made sure to be there." That was the honest version. I appreciated it. A less honest man would have framed it as coincidence. "And Domingo's family," I said. "You stopped there 2 months ago." "Needed water. He was sitting on the porch and he looked like a man with too much on his mind and nobody to talk to." Cole shrugged one shoulder. "We talked for a while. He told me about his daughter, her roots. Said she went up into the Sacramentos every autumn for the plant gathering, and he usually went with her, but this year his joints had gone bad and he stopped. He said it like it was fine, but it wasn't. He was worried about her going alone." "And you said you'd come back if he needed you." "And he needed me. And you came. And I came." We sat with that for a moment. "Did you know," I asked carefully, "that she didn't need you to come?" He was quiet long enough that I thought he might not answer. "I know now," he said. Outside, I could hear Nara stacking wood against the side of the house, the clean, purposeful sound of it log against log. A rhythm. She worked in rhythms, I'd noticed. Everything she did had a shape to it, a pattern that wasn't showy but wasn't accidental either. I thought about what it would take to spend 3 weeks alone in the Sacramentos in late October and come down not merely alive but functional. You'd have to know the land the way you know your own house in the dark, by feel, by memory, by something older than either. I found out later, pieced it together from Domingo and from what Cole told me over the following days, what had actually happened up there. She hadn't been lost, she'd been delayed. The plant Nara had gone to gather was called Osha in the Spanish, bare root to the Anglos, and something older and more specific in the Mescalero tongue that I never managed to pronounce correctly. Her grandmother had taught her about it, had taught her the specific locations in the limestone hills where it grew thick, the signs of a good root versus a poor one, the proper way to harvest so the plant came back the following year. Her father needed it. His joints, his breathing, it was the kind of creeping illness that doesn't announce itself all at once, but wears you down season by season. The Osha was one of the few things that gave him consistent relief. She'd been making it for 2 years, in a preparation her grandmother had shown her, and it helped. She'd found her patch on the 8th day, but the weather had come in, a hard early storm, unusual even for October, ice and wind that made the trails impassable. She'd sheltered in a rock formation she knew, had enough dried food and water, had a fire. She was not in danger, not in any crisis she couldn't manage. But she had stayed longer than expected, because when the storm broke, she'd found something else. A family, Mescalero, an older woman and 2 young children, had sheltered in the same formation during the storm and hadn't come out of it as well as Nara had. The woman had twisted her ankle on the ice. The children were cold and frightened. The nearest settlement they could reach was 3 days away. Nara had stayed. 4 more days helping them move. Slow travel, the older woman on an improvised crutch that Nara made from a juniper branch, the children rotating between walking and being carried when they flagged. Finding food, finding water, reading the land. On the 16th day, she'd gotten the family to a Mescalero camp in the valley and made sure they were settled. On the 19th day, she'd started back. On the 20th day, she'd encountered Cole Hargrove walking in what he claimed was a purposeful direction in the hills above her family's route. She'd watched him for 20 minutes from behind a piñon stand before she concluded he was not a threat, just lost, and stepped out to redirect him. He was very polite about it, she told me later, with a dryness that I appreciated. He said, "I appreciate the assistance," and then tried to take the lead for another 100 yards before he admitted he didn't know where he was going. "What did you do?" "I walked in front," she said. "He followed." "Was he useful at all?" She considered this with genuine fairness. "He was good at carrying things," she said, "and he didn't talk too much, which is rarer than it should be." That evening, sitting at Domingo's table, I wrote several things in my logbook. A man who goes looking to save someone discovers he has been looking to save himself. This is neither new nor particularly interesting. It happens all the time. What is interesting is what he does when he realizes it. Whether he runs or whether he stays, and whether staying is its own kind of courage. The woman he found did not need saving. This is important. Men who go looking for the helpless sometimes cannot recover from finding the capable instead. They feel foolish, or they feel unnecessary, or they feel threatened. Cole Hargrove did not appear to feel any of these things. He appeared to feel, from what I could observe, something more complicated and more useful, humbled, not diminished, humbled. There is a difference. I have been working on understanding the difference for most of my adult life. I looked up from the logbook. Nara had come back inside. She was setting out bowls for the evening meal, moving around the small room with an efficiency that was not brisk, not indifferent to the space or the people in it, but that had a sort of quiet confidence to it, like she always knew where her hands were. Cole was watching her. Not overtly, he had the good sense not to be obvious about it, but in the way people watch things that confuse them in a way they find they don't actually mind. Domingo was watching Cole. I was watching all of them. I closed the logbook on my finger to keep my place, which is a habit my sister says makes me look like I'm plotting something, and thought about the ride east from Baca Creek that Cole had made 6 days ago. The canteen and the bedroll and the Winchester never fired at a person. The grief that had bent him forward. I thought about how he looked now. Still bent a little. That doesn't go away quickly. But something had shifted, some small, structural thing, the way a house shifts when a window is opened and the air pressure changes. He didn't look like a man on his way to somewhere anymore. He looked like a man who had arrived somewhere unexpected and was taking stock. Nara set a bowl in front of him without comment. He said, "Thank you." She nodded and went back to the stove. Domingo caught my eye across the table, and I saw in his face the particular satisfaction of a man who has been sick and tired and worried for a long time, and who recognizes, with the precision of someone who has earned the recognition, that something has arrived in his house that might last. I turned back to my logbook. Note 114. Some arrivals are accidental. Some rescues go in unexpected directions. The hardest kind of help to give is the kind that doesn't look like help at all, that looks like showing up and staying and being present without announcing it. Cole Hargrove rode east looking for someone to save. He found a woman who showed him the way home from the hills. He doesn't know yet what that means, but he's still at the table. That's something. Outside, the October wind came off the Sacramentos and moved through the Ocotillo fence with a sound like a question nobody had quite asked yet. The cookfire threw light across the walls of the small adobe room, amber, shifting, the kind of light that makes everything look like memory even while it's happening. I wrote it all down. That was my job. Before I slept that night, rolled in my blanket in the bed of my supply wagon, I thought about the 114 notes I'd accumulated, about the patterns they made if you stood back far enough, about the particular stubbornness of people who keep moving toward things that are hard because stopping feels worse. Cole Hargrove was 32 years old and had not recovered from a grief I didn't know the shape of. He had spent 3 years filling that shape with motion and purpose and other people's crises. He had ridden into the Mescalero Hills on the wrong assumption, that someone needed him, and found instead a woman who was managing perfectly well, thank you, and who had added him to her list of things to manage with the same calm efficiency she applied to everything else. And somehow, in the 4 days they'd spent coming down out of those hills together, something had happened that I couldn't quite document because I hadn't been there. But I could see the residue of it. In the way she'd said he didn't talk too much, with her voice carrying something that wasn't quite softness but was adjacent to it. In the way he'd said her name, Nara, when he was telling her father she was safe, the careful way you say a word you want to keep. In the way Domingo had looked at his daughter when she came through the door that afternoon, and how she'd gone to him first, and how he'd put one hand on her shoulder and kept it there while she told him she was fine. She was fine. She'd been careful. None of this was documentation. Not really. It was interpretation, and interpretation is the unreliable cousin of facts. But I kept it anyway. Note 115. The hardest thing to document is what hasn't happened yet. The potential of a thing, the shape of a story still in the process of becoming itself. But even potential leaves evidence. You just have to know what to look for. I stayed in Chilarosa 3 days longer than I needed to. I told myself it was the mules. One of them had thrown a shoe on the road from Ruidoso, and finding a farrier in Chilarosa in October was a negotiation that took time. Which was true. But I'd have waited a day for the shoe, not 3, if there hadn't been something else keeping me there. The logbook was keeping me there, not in any mystical sense, just practically. When a story is still in motion, a man with a logbook doesn't leave. It's a weakness, my sister would say. She would be right. Cole Hargrove was still at Domingo's house. He hadn't announced any intention of staying. He hadn't asked permission. He'd simply not left. The morning after I arrived, he was back in the yard before dawn, splitting wood. Not because Domingo asked, not because it was an obvious necessity, exactly though it would be before winter. Just because there was wood and there was an axe and there was a man with his hands unused and his mind too loud. I know that feeling. I've split a lot of wood for the same reason. Nara watched him from the doorway for a while the first morning. Not suspiciously, more in the way you observe an animal you're not sure about, measuring it for intent. Then she went about her day. Her day, I discovered, was considerable. She was the working engine of that household in all the ways that don't get named at the dinner table. The garden that had been put to bed for winter, she'd done that. The dried herbs hanging in rope bunches from the ceiling beams, she'd gathered, dried, and sorted every one. The repair to the roof where the summer rains had gotten in mud plaster and patience, her work. She made the preparation for her father's joints 3 times a week, a process that took most of a morning and filled the house with a smell like pine resin and something deeper that I couldn't name. She also, I noticed, kept a kind of record herself. Not a logbook, nothing written, but she had a system. Every morning she made a quick circuit of the house and yard, touching things, the fence post, the rain barrel, the edge of the cook stove, checking, taking inventory. The way a person counts their coins not because they doubt the amount, but because the counting itself is reassuring. I recognized the impulse. It's the same reason I write things down. The second day, Cole helped her carry the rain barrel. It needed moving to patch a crack in the base, and I happened to be near enough to hear the exchange. "You don't have to stay," she said, not unkindly, just directly the way she did most things. "I know," he said. A pause. They were lifting the barrel together, navigating it around the corner of the house. "My father will tell the story differently in a week," she said. "He'll have you as the hero of it. He likes stories with heroes." "That would be inaccurate." "Yes," she set down her end of the barrel and looked at the crack, running her thumb along it. "But he's my father, and it would make him happy, so I've decided not to correct it." Cole was quiet for a moment. "What's the accurate version?" She glanced at him sideways. It was the first time I'd seen her look at him like that, direct, but with something warmer behind it, the way sun moves behind cloud. "You walked in circles until I found you," she said. "And then you carried things and didn't complain. And you made a fire without being asked when I was too tired to, and you didn't say anything when I slept for 11 hours straight after we got the family settled." She turned back to the barrel crack. "That's the accurate version," she said. "It's not as good as a hero story, but it's what happened." "It doesn't," he stopped, tried again. "I don't need it to be a hero story." "I know," she said. "That's one of the things I noticed about you." I wrote that down later, word for word, as close as I could remember it. "One of the things I noticed about you." Not the thing, one of a list. She'd been compiling a list. The farrier got to my mule on the second afternoon, and I could have left that evening. I didn't. I made camp at the edge of Chilarosa near the trading post and walked back to Domingo's house the next morning with the excuse of returning a blanket I'd borrowed, which was a thin excuse. But Domingo accepted it with the grace of a man who suspected my motives and didn't mind them. He was sitting in his chair on the porch in the morning sun, which I was learning was his preferred location when his joints allowed. His hands were wrapped around a cup of the preparation Nara made him, and he looked, I searched for the right word, maintained. Not well exactly, but cared for. The difference between a fence that's falling and one that someone keeps painting. He asked me about my roots, my supply work, where I'd come from. The kind of questions that are really the architecture for other questions. I answered them, and we sat together for a while in the way that men sometimes can, without needing to fill every pause. "You have children?" he asked eventually. "No," I said, "never married." He nodded. "I had a wife," he said. "She died when Nara was 12, Apache fever." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time." He turned the cup in his hands. She was young, but she managed." "She manages everything." He paused. "Sometimes I worry about that, about a person who manages everything." I waited. "A person who manages everything," he said carefully, "sometimes forgets to need anything themselves. It becomes a habit. Self-sufficiency, but the kind that goes too deep. That closes things off." He looked out across the yard to where Cole was mending a section of the Ocotillo fence that had come apart in the summer heat, working slowly, methodically, the kind of work that doesn't require concentration so much as patience. "She trusts very few people," Domingo said. "She learned early that trust is something you spend carefully, like water in dry country. You don't waste it." He paused again. "But she also learned from her grandmother that there are different kinds of trust. Some you give, some you earn, and some," he shook his head, almost amused, "some you simply wake up and find you've already given before you made any decision about it." "Which kind is this?" I asked, nodding toward Cole. Domingo looked at me with the patient amusement of a man who has known exactly what he was watching since the first morning. "I think," he said, "she's still arguing about it with herself. I want to be careful here, in the way that documentation requires care. I am not telling a romance in the conventional sense. I am not a man who believes love arrives on horseback with trumpets. I've seen enough of the world to know it usually arrives the way rain does. You don't notice it at first, and then you're wet, and then you can't remember the moment it started. What I am documenting is something more specific. The slow, difficult process of two people with significant damage deciding, despite knowing better, to be in the same place." Cole Hargrove had damage I've described, the grief he didn't name that bent him forward. Nara Swiftwater had a different kind, the damage of having been capable for so long that everyone, including herself, had stopped asking if she was all right. The damage of a girl who lost her mother at 12 and compensated by becoming indispensable. Who grew into a woman whose competence was so obvious and so total that the people who loved her sometimes forgot she was carrying it rather than being carried by it. You could see it in small moments, the way she sometimes set down a task and stood for a moment with her hands at her sides, just standing. The way her face, when she thought no one was looking, went somewhere distant and came back with something that wasn't quite sadness but was adjacent to exhaustion. Cole noticed it, that was the thing. He noticed it and he didn't comment on it or try to fix it or offer help. He was there when she came back from wherever she'd gone, and he didn't make anything of it. On the third morning, I went to refill my canteen at the well behind the house, and I found them both already there. She was drawing water. He was sitting on the well wall. They weren't talking. They were just present with each other in the way I'd heard described at Enrique's trading post, like he was there in case she needed something but wasn't going to announce it. I turned around quietly and got my water from the rain barrel instead. The story I need to tell about those 3 days is not actually the romance, or what was becoming a romance, in the reluctant, effortful way that real ones happen. The story I need to tell is about the third night, when everything that had been moving quietly beneath the surface of that household broke through. It started with Domingo. He'd seemed stable, managed, maintained. But that evening after supper he tried to stand from his chair and couldn't. His legs had gone, not paralyzed, but failing, the joints seizing up in the way his illness made them sometimes. He made no sound. He simply sat back down, very controlled, and held still. Nara was at his side before I'd fully registered what had happened. She had a way of moving fast that she usually kept hidden under her general efficiency. You didn't notice she was quick until she needed to be. "Papa," she said. "It will pass," he said. "I know, let me." "It will pass, Mija." His voice was quiet and firm, and I understood this was a negotiation they'd had before. The sick man's particular pride, the particular resistance to being witnessed in weakness by the people whose opinion you most value. But his hands were shaking. I could see it from across the room. Nara knelt next to his chair and took both his hands in hers, and I saw the moment she felt the shaking, the small, fast contraction in her face, quickly contained. The way pain organizes itself into function in people who have been doing it long enough. She began to talk to him, low, steady in Spanish mixed with what I recognized as mescalero words, a rhythm to it, not prayer, not quite. Something older than either language, her grandmother's voice, maybe, something she'd been given. Cole stood up from the table. He went to the back of the house without a word. I heard him in the storage room, the sound of him looking through things carefully, not rummaging, not disrupting. Then he came back with the jar of Nara's preparation from the shelf, the one she made for her father that took all morning, and set it on the table near the fire where it would warm. Not on the fire, just near it. The right temperature was important. I'd seen her do it before. He hadn't been shown this. He just watched and remembered and applied it. Then he went back to his chair and sat down and didn't make anything of it. Nara, still holding her father's hands, glanced up and saw the jar near the fire. She looked at Cole for one moment. He was looking at the table. She looked back at her father. Later, after Domingo had steadied and been helped to his bed, he walked there himself slowly with a dignity that cost him and that nobody commented on. Nara came back out and sat at the table. Not across from Cole, beside him, which was different. I was in the corner with my logbook, trying to be invisible, which I was not particularly succeeding at. She put her hands flat on the table, looking at them. "This will get worse," she said. She meant her father. "The winters are hard on him. Last year it was difficult." Cole said nothing, which was the right response. "I manage," she said. "I always manage." She said it without pride or complaint, just as fact. "But sometimes I think about the word always and what it costs." "What does it cost?" he asked. She was quiet long enough that I thought she'd decided not to answer. Then, "You stop asking for help because asking for help means admitting that what you're doing is hard. And if you admit it's hard, you might feel how hard it is. And if you feel how hard it is," she stopped. "You might not be able to keep going," he said. She turned and looked at him. "Yes," she said, "exactly that." He nodded, not dismissively, not with the fake comfort of someone who wants to move past an uncomfortable truth. Just, "Yes, I understand that. I have lived in that place." "I know the feeling," he said. "I thought you might," she said. "You have the posture of someone who's been carrying something for a long time." He exhaled slowly. He stopped, the door near the grief. "I had a wife. 3 years ago, she died in childbirth, the baby too." The room was very still. "I'm sorry," Nara said. "I didn't stop to, I just kept moving, kept finding things to do." He looked at his hands. "Fixing things, finding people to help, because if I was useful I had a reason to be somewhere." "And then you came here," she said. "And then I came here." Another silence, not uncomfortable, the kind that has weight and texture. "You don't have to keep being useful to justify being somewhere," she said. Not gently, exactly, she wasn't built for that particular kind of gentle, but directly, with the intention of it landing clearly, not softly. He looked at her. He stopped, looked away. When he looked back, something in his face had shifted, something had dropped, like a window shade pulled up suddenly, letting in more light than expected. "I know," he said, "I know that intellectually. But you haven't felt it yet." "No," he said it with a particular honesty that cost him something. "Not yet." She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, went to the fire, checked the jar. The preparation was warm. She poured a measure into a cup, set it by the door for when her father woke in the night. Then she came back to the table, and she did something I hadn't expected. She sat back down beside him, in the same chair position as before. Not moving closer, she wasn't that kind of demonstrative, but not moving away. "Then you can stay," she said, "until you feel it." He looked at her. "That might take a while," he said. "I know," she said. "I have a lot of things to manage. You can be one of them." And there it was, said dry and direct, and with a sliver of something underneath it that was not dry at all. Something that had decided. He laughed. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh, short, surprised, real. The kind of laugh that comes out before you can manage it. She didn't smile exactly, but the corners of her eyes moved. I looked down at my logbook. Note 116. The moment when grief starts to move is not dramatic. It's not a speech or a breakthrough or a scene. It's a laugh you didn't plan beside a person who told you the truth without softening it. It's the recognition of someone who speaks your particular language, not of words but of weight. Outside, the wind had settled. The night was very clear, the kind of clear you only get in the high desert at elevation, where the stars look close enough to navigate by. Which, of course, was true. You could navigate by them. You just had to be willing to look up. I left the next morning. My mule was shod, my contract was a day late, and I had been a witness long enough. I said goodbye to Domingo, who shook my hand with both of his and called me a good man, which I felt was generous. I said goodbye to Cole, who stood in the yard and said, "Safe roads," which is what you say when you mean something more. Nara walked with me to the gate. "You were taking notes," she said, not accusatory. "Just factual." "I keep a logbook," I said. "I know, I saw it." She looked at me steadily. "Write it accurately." "I'll try." The part about the hills, he was not lost. He was simply moving in a large circle, I said. The corners of her eyes moved again. "Yes," she said, "write it that way." I climbed up to my wagon seat, picked up the reins. "He's a good man," I said. It felt inadequate. It was the best I had. "I know," she said. "I noticed that before I noticed the circle." I drove north out of Chilarosa, with the Sacramento Mountains at my back going pink and gold in the morning light. I wrote for 2 hours straight on the moving wagon, which is terrible for penmanship, but very good for capturing things while they're still warm. What survives the telling? I've been thinking about that phrase since I wrote it as the heading for this section. I'm not sure where it came from. I think it's about this. We tell stories to make sense of things, and in the telling, some things survive and some don't. The accurate things, the moment-by-moment facts, they're there, but they flatten out. What survives most powerfully is the feeling of a thing, the texture of a room at night, the sound of a man's first real laugh in 3 years, the way a woman sits back down beside someone instead of moving away and makes it the most consequential thing she's done all day. Cole Hargrove had been carrying grief like a task. Like if he carried it in the right direction for long enough, it would eventually deliver him somewhere. Nara Swiftwater had been managing everything, including her own need to be managed by no one, until it became a kind of armor she'd forgotten she was wearing. They were two people with their wounds in different places, which meant sometimes the contours fit. Not neatly, not without complication. The things between two people with real histories never go neatly. But the first step, the earliest and hardest step, is recognizing that someone else can see the shape of what you've been carrying and doesn't flinch. She didn't flinch. He stayed. I didn't return to Chilarosa for 4 months. The work took me north, Fort Union, then east toward the Canadian river breaks, then a long, miserable winter contract supplying a mining operation above Cimarron that paid well and nearly killed me twice from cold alone. I wrote in my logbook all winter, adding notes about the things I'd seen and heard, but the entries about Cole and Nara and Domingo sat near the middle of that book like something unresolved. A sentence without a period, a question I'd asked and hadn't gone back to hear answered. In February, I had a layup in Santa Fe while the roads south were impassable. I wrote letters, played cards, and drank more coffee than was wise. I thought about the Swiftwater house and the Ocotillo fence and the sound of wood being split in the early morning. I wondered if he was still there. I wondered if she'd told him to go and he'd gone, or if she'd told him to go and he'd stayed, or if neither of them had said anything either way, and it had simply continued the way things sometimes do. Not by decision, but by accumulation. The way a fire keeps burning not because you decided to keep it burning, but because you kept putting wood on it. I wondered about Domingo. The winter would have been hard on him. That kind of illness was always worse in cold. In March, the roads opened. I took a contract south. I arrived in Chilarosa on a Thursday in early March, the year turning green around the edges of things, the first hint of it, tentative, not yet committed to spring. The cottonwoods along the Rio were beginning to bud. The air smelled like cold earth and somewhere, distantly, rain. I pulled up to the Swiftwater house and sat in my wagon for a moment. The Ocotillo fence was repaired. Not just the section Cole had been working when I left, the whole length of it, neat and solid, with new sections added where the old ones had rotted. There were other changes. A woodpile along the north wall that was substantial enough to have taken weeks to build, stacked with the particular care of someone with time and standards. New mud plaster on the east face of the house, where the winter rains would hit hardest. A small kitchen garden prepared for planting, the soil turned and amended, waiting. Someone had been here working for a long time. I climbed down from the wagon. Nara came out before I'd taken 3 steps. She looked the same direct eyes, same economy of movement, but there was something different in her face. Not softer exactly, more open, like a door that had been pushed to for a long time was now simply resting, not closed. "Prude," she said. "Miss Swiftwater," I looked around at the yard. "Someone's been busy." "Yes," she said. "Your father," I asked, "how is?" "Better," she said. "Stable, better than last autumn." I nodded and, "He's in the back," she said, answering the question I hadn't quite gotten to. "He's been expanding the storage room. He decided we needed more space." She said this with a kind of resigned amusement that told me it was a subject she'd had opinions about. He was right, which makes it more annoying. I laughed. She almost did. "Come in," she said. "There's coffee." There was coffee, and there was Domingo sitting at the table looking considerably better than last autumn, color in his face, hands steadier. And there was, eventually, Cole. He came in from the back of the house carrying a timber, which he leaned against the wall with the practiced ease of a man who has been carrying timbers regularly for a while. He was dusty, and he had a cut on his left hand wrapped in a piece of cloth, and he looked good. That's the word. He looked good. Not fixed, not healed in the dramatic sense. That's not how grief works, and I've seen enough of it to know. But he looked like a man who was inhabiting himself more fully. Like the weight was still there, it would always be there, some of it, but he'd redistributed it. Found a way to carry it that left his hands free. He saw me and his face did the same thing it had done at Baca Creek. That flicker recognition, something registered, but warmer this time. "Prude," he said. "Hargrove," I said, "you're still here." "Still here," he agreed. There was nothing complicated in the way he said it. It was just a fact. He was still here. I sat down. Domingo poured coffee. Nara sat across from me and Cole sat beside her, naturally without ceremony, the way people occupy space when they've learned each other's dimensions. Not touching, not performing. Just adjacent in a way that had its own quiet evidence. We talked. That's maybe insufficient for what actually happened in the following hours, but it's what it was. We talked. Domingo told stories. He was a man who'd accumulated a great many, and now that his body had given him more sitting down time, he deployed them generously. The mining camps he'd worked in his 20s. The years he'd spent learning to read from a Franciscan friar in Mesilla. His wife, whom he could talk about now with a kind of warmth that had moved past the acute phase of loss into something that was more like gratitude for the existence of the thing. He told these stories in the way of a man who has an audience, and I was a good audience, and he appreciated it. Nara contributed details when he got things wrong, which was often, not from dishonesty, but from the general optimism with which he remembered things. The mule didn't run, papa, it walked away from you with great dignity. This kind of correction, delivered with a flatness that was entirely affectionate. Cole talked less but steadily, the kind of man who speaks when he has something to say and is comfortable in the space when he doesn't. He told me about the storage room expansion. He'd found old adobe bricks behind the house, enough to add 6 feet. He'd also, I got this from Domingo rather than from Cole himself, because Cole didn't volunteer it, repaired the roof over the back bedroom, where the leak had been getting worse, and had spent 3 weeks in January digging a new trench to redirect the spring runoff away from the house foundation. He told me it was a simple job, Domingo said, with a mild look at Cole. It was relatively straightforward, Cole said. He came in at the end of the 2nd week, Domingo continued, with mud up to his chest. There was a complication with the soil composition. He looked like he'd been buried, Domingo said. But the trench works, Cole said, and then quieter, the water doesn't come in anymore. Domingo reached across the table and put his hand briefly on Cole's arm. Just for a moment, the way a father does. Cole looked at the table, and his jaw tightened in the way people's jaws tighten when something has moved through them, and they're deciding whether to let it show. He let it show a little. I looked at my coffee cup and gave him the dignity of not being watched for a moment. After dinner, when Domingo had gone to rest and the dishes were done, I sat outside with Nara and Cole in the last of the evening light. The mountains were purple-gray in the dusk, the Sacramento peaks still holding snow at elevation, the valley going soft and warm below. Nara had a piece of cordage she was working, braiding it with her hands while she watched the mountains, the kind of thing you do when sitting still feels like too much of a commitment. Cole was leaning against the fence post, looking at the sky in the way he'd looked at the landscape from the sorrel gelding in October, except different. His eyes had somewhere to land now. "Your father's doing better," I said to Nara. "The preparation helps and the warmer weather helps," and she paused, hands still moving. "Consistency helps, knowing someone will be here." I let that sit for a moment. "What are your plans?" I asked Cole, because I am a direct man and I had been patient for 4 months. He looked at me, then at Nara, a question in his look, not asking permission but checking something. She kept braiding the cordage. "I've been looking at land," he said. "There's a parcel north of here, about 4 miles, good grass, decent water. The price is manageable if I sell some things I've been holding on to." A pause. "There's an old structure on it, needs work." "There's always a structure that needs work," I said. "There is," he agreed. "What kind of holding?" I asked. "Ranch, farm?" "Both probably. Start small, build it." He looked at the mountains. "I've been doing other people's work for a long time, felt like time to do my own." I nodded. I thought about the man at Baca Creek in October, aimed somewhere without a destination. I thought about what had changed and how quietly. "That sounds like a good plan," I said. "It's the beginning of a plan," he corrected. "Plans aren't plans until they start happening." Nara set down the cordage, looked at the mountains. "The parcel he's talking about has a water problem on the east side," she said. "Seasonal, the spring floods it." "There's a way to address that," Cole said. "There might be. You'd need to walk the east perimeter and see where the water's coming from." "I was planning to do that Thursday." "I know the land north of here," she said. "I've gathered from those hills since I was 8 years old." A pause. "I could walk it with you Thursday." He looked at her. "If you want a second opinion," she added, without any particular inflection. "I would," he said. "I value your opinion." She picked up the cordage again. "Good," she said. "Then Thursday." I stayed another 2 days, sleeping in the supply wagon, eating at Domingo's table, adding to the logbook. I want to record something accurately here, because accuracy matters, and because I have spent enough of this account on observed facts that I owe the reader the observed truth of the emotional dimension as well. This was not a simple love story. Cole Hargrove was still in quiet moments somewhere I couldn't reach him. I'd catch it in the evenings, a sudden distance in his face, a stillness that was not peace. The grief didn't announce itself. It just moved through him sometimes like weather through a room when a window opens, present, cold, brief, then gone. He'd come back from it without drama, and he'd go on doing what he was doing, and nobody would say anything. Nara knew she didn't fix it, she didn't talk around it, she just stayed in proximity, did the next thing. Made the fire, or checked on her father, or handed him a tool when he was working, and let him come back from wherever he'd gone in his own time. And he always did. That's something. That's actually the thing, the coming back, the continuing to come back to the work and the table and the conversation and the yard in the morning when the light was still thin and the mountains were just shapes. Coming back to that every day, choosing to be present in a place instead of running toward someone else's emergency. There was one moment, the last afternoon I was there, that I want to document precisely. Nara was in the garden, turning the last of the soil for planting. Cole came out from the storage room, done with his work for the day, and stood in the yard. He watched her for a moment, not in the self-conscious way I'd noticed last autumn, not with the careful distance of a man who doesn't know what he's allowed. Just watched, the way you watch something that belongs to your life. That is part of the landscape of your life. She looked up and saw him looking. She didn't say anything, he didn't say anything. She went back to the garden. He walked over and crouched at the edge of the turned soil, and they talked about the planting, what would go where, what she'd tried last year, what had worked. He asked questions. She answered them. Sometimes she asked something back, and he thought about it seriously before answering because he took her questions seriously. I was sitting on the porch with my logbook, ostensibly writing, actually watching. I wrote, Note 117, love, the real kind, not the showy kind, looks a lot like paying attention. It looks like asking what you asked last year and how it worked out. It looks like crouching at the edge of someone's garden and caring about their answer. It also looks like a man who went looking to save someone and found instead that being saved is not a diminishment. That being redirected by someone who knows the land better than you do is not failure. That the woman who stepped out from behind the piñon stand and told you where you were going was not rescuing you from trouble. She was showing you a direction you hadn't thought to look. East into the hills, and then back down again. To a house with an ocotillo fence, and a father with a chair in the morning sun, and a kitchen garden waiting for spring. To stay, to build the thing that needs building. To be somewhere on purpose. Thursday came. I was already gone north by then, up toward Socorro on a new contract. I didn't see them walk the east perimeter of the land. Didn't see what they found there or what they decided. But I know some of what happened after, because Chilarosa is not a large town and supply contractors hear things. And Domingo wrote me a letter in June that I still have somewhere in my gear. He wrote, Cole has purchased the land. The water problem on the east side is being managed. Nara found the source last spring. The structure is being rebuilt. He works from before dawn. He eats dinner here most evenings. He is teaching himself to read mescalero plant names from my mother's book, which I did not ask him to do and which makes me very happy. He cannot pronounce half of them. Nara corrects him. This is also very good. My joints are better this spring than last. The preparation continues to help. I sit in my chair and watch the mountains, which I have always done, and now I also watch my daughter, which I have not always been able to do without worry. I watch her without worry now most days. That is a gift that arrived on a Tuesday in October and stayed. I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it and put it in the logbook, behind note 117. I have to say something about what I believe actually happened in the hills, in those 4 days between when Cole found her and when they came down. I've thought about it a great deal. I've turned it over from every angle the way you turn a piece of quartz to find where the light goes in. He went looking for her, believing she was in distress. He found her managing, capable, entirely in possession of herself and her situation. Any other man, many other men, would have felt made unnecessary by this, would have found a way to reframe it, to locate himself as useful within her competence, to maintain the fiction of the rescue even in the absence of a rescued. Cole didn't do that. He just walked behind her and carried things. And in the simple willingness to be the person who carries things when someone else knows the way, something shifted. Not in her. She'd been herself the whole time. In him. The version of himself that needed to be the one who goes and saves, who earns his place in any room by being needed, that version got quieter. Not gone, but quieter. What does a man become when he stops performing usefulness and simply becomes useful? What does he become when he stops running toward other people's emergencies and starts staying in one place long enough to build something? I think Cole Hargrove was still finding out. I think that's what Domingo's letter was describing without using those words. The ongoing, daily, unglamorous process of a man learning to exist somewhere rather than pass through. And Nara, I have thought about her too, about the armor of total self-sufficiency and how you take it off, about what it requires of a person to let someone see that the managing is hard. To say sometimes I think about what always costs to someone you've known for 3 days in a room at night. It requires, I think, the specific faith that the person you're saying it to will not either collapse under the weight of it or try to fix it, will simply hear it, sit with it, stay. He stayed. So did she. I went back to Chilarosa one more time, late autumn of that year, nearly a year after I'd first seen Cole at Baca Creek. The parcel he'd bought north of town had a structure that was recognizably a house now. Adobe walls up on 3 sides, the 4th in progress. A stone foundation that looked like it had been laid with real attention to the soil composition this time. He was working on the roof when I rode up on the frame of it, measuring something. He came down, we shook hands. His grip was the same, but his face was lighter. Still the same face, still with those older-than-his-years eyes, but something in them had landed, had found a place to rest. "How's it coming?" I asked. "Slow," he said, "but it's coming." He looked at the walls with the particular satisfaction of a man who has spent real labor on something and can see it. "I made a mistake on the east window placement. Nara pointed it out in July. I had to take that section down and rebuild." "That sounds painful." "It was," he said with equanimity. "But she was right. The light would have been wrong all winter." He said it the way you say something about a person whose judgment you've learned to trust. Not deference. Trust. The specific kind that comes from being corrected enough times and finding the corrections accurate. We walked the place. He showed me what he'd done and what was left. He had a plan for the garden, for a small barn to the south. He was thinking about horses, not many, 2 or 3, for breeding maybe. He had thoughts about this, specific ones, and he talked through them with the focus of a man whose mind was fully engaged with something present rather than something fled from. When we got back to the main structure, we stopped and looked at it. "She's going to help with the east wall," he said, "next weekend." "Is she?" I said. "She has opinions about the window placement," he said. "Among other things," a pause, "I've started listening to most of them." "Most," I said. He looked sideways at me. "She thinks I should have 2 more feet of ceiling height in the main room," he said. "I think the structure won't support it without a different beam arrangement." "Who's right?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to look into the beam arrangement," he said. I laughed. He almost did. I rode down to Domingo's house that afternoon, which had become something of a ritual. He was in his chair on the porch, the same as always, the mountains behind him going gold in the late light. Nara was inside. I could hear her moving around. I sat with Domingo for a while. "You're going to write this all down," he said. "I already have," I said. He nodded. "Write it carefully," he said. "Miss Swiftwater told me the same thing last year." He smiled, the full version, the one that used his whole face. "She gets it from me," he said. "Her grandmother used to say, the truth doesn't need decoration, but it needs witness." I thought about that. The truth doesn't need decoration, but it needs witness. That's maybe the best articulation I've encountered for what a logbook actually is. "Domingo," I said, "are you happy?" He looked at the mountains. turned his cup in his hands. "I'm a man who has been sick for 3 years," he said, "and who watched his daughter carry everything alone because she learned it from watching me carry things alone. And I did not know how to stop, and she did not know how to stop, because we are very much alike, she and I," he paused. "And then a man rode east from Baca Creek and walked in circles until she found him, and he stayed. And he stopped, looked at his hands. She started to put some things down," he said quietly. He looked back at the mountains. "So yes," he said, "I am happy, I am very, very happy. I left before dark. I had a delivery to make in Roswell, and the roads were only decent for another week before the winter rains. I said goodbye to Domingo. Said goodbye to Cole, who was heading down from the parcel and happened to arrive at the gate the same time I was leaving. Nara walked me to the wagon again, the same walk as last year, almost exactly. "Write it accurately," she said again. "You said that last year," I said. "Last year I didn't know you well enough to say more." She looked at me steadily. "This year I'll add, write the part about the circles. People will want it to be something more, some dramatic rescue, some great competence. Write the circles." "I will," I said. "And write," she stopped. "What?" She looked back at the house. Cole was talking to Domingo on the porch, leaning on the fence, and I could hear Domingo's laugh from here, the full one, generous. "Write that it was hard," she said, "for both of us. Not dramatic hard, just the ordinary daily kind, the kind that doesn't make a good story on its own, but that is what it's actually made of." She looked at me. "Write that." "I will," I said again. She nodded once, went back inside. I climbed up, picked up the reins. Cole raised a hand from the porch, not looking up from whatever Domingo was saying. I raised mine back. Drove north. I have 143 notes in my logbook now, across 2 volumes. The second volume starts with Baca Creek in October of 1887 and runs forward from there. Note 143 is the last one I wrote about this story, sitting in my wagon on the Roswell Road in the early dark, the Sacramento mountains behind me holding the last of the evening light on their peaks. It says, "A man went east looking for someone to save. He found a woman who didn't need saving. He stayed anyway. He carried things. He listened to the corrections. He rebuilt the section with the wrong window. He learned to pronounce plant names from a book in a language not his own. He is building a house with a ceiling height that will likely be 2 feet taller than he originally planned." That is not a heroic story. It is better than a heroic story. It is the story of a man who finally stopped running and found out that the place he stopped was worth stopping in. And a woman who set something down, not all the way, not at once, but a little at a time, the way you unload something heavy, carefully on stable ground, making sure of your footing before you let it go.